Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get yourself a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. With over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, man, you're spoiled for choice with something to listen to. So I know what you're going to do as soon as this show is ended. You're going to head over to audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro and pick yourself up something free today.
Warning, this podcast is likely to contain numerous instances of vulgarity and or profanity, which some may deem inappropriate. If you're of an overly sensitive disposition, stop listening now. Additionally, the podcast will be filled with numerous spoilers throughout, so if you haven't had the opportunity to read, watch, or enjoy the story prior to the show, please do so, before continuing with this episode of Sweet Story Bro.
Get ready for action! 3, 2, 1, fight!
Hey yo, what is up? I am your friend Steve Russell, writer and podcaster Steve Russell, not only for this fine podcast, Sweet Story Bro, but also for another one in case you weren't aware. I also co-host on a wrestling show that I record with my friend Kieran called the Saturday Lunchtime Wrestling Club Podcast. That was his name, he came up with it, and you can check that out on SoundCloud right now, or after this episode. Actually, take some time, enjoy this story, and get ready to listen to some wrestling stuff after if you're so interested. We talk about, well, the episodes only come once a month right now, so there's a lot. The episodes are long, which is good because we have a good time for deconstruction of the story and what's going on, and lots of area and room for discussion on the topics that we want to talk about. So you know what? If you are a wrestling fan, go check it out. Support my work elsewhere, see what I have to think about the product today. But I know that's not what brought you here. I know that's why you've not downloaded this show to your podcast listening device of your choice, be it iTunes or on your iPhone, maybe your new iPhone 7 or 7 Plus if you happen to get one. That just released the other day. And if you are so inclined to line up, pre-order, and, just buy into that overtly consumerist culture of having to have the latest stuff, the latest tech right now, and you're listening to it, hey, I hope I sound good through those lightning earpods. Maybe I sound more bassy, more sexy than ever. I don't know. You tell me. Get in contact. Let me know. But of course, I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much for downloading this latest episode of Sweet Story Bro. And like always, I hope you enjoyed listening to the last one and maybe introduced you to a story that you never knew about or you had no idea about its existence, and now it's one of your favorite stories because you decided to check it out. Or at the very least, I hope it was an entertaining show, looking at the good, the bad, the geeky, and whether it's worth your time. Because I let you know, of course, whether it was officially too sweet or officially just not sweet enough. You guys know how it goes, but you know what? That's a good primer for those who are checking this show out for the first time here on episode number 20, where we're looking at Jason McNamara's story, The Rattler, the graphic novel, The Rattler. And, before we get into that, a little bit of business as always. Just a quick reminder to tell you to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher if you're Android inclined, so you can ensure that you never, ever miss one, no matter what. No matter what life throws in your way or how busy you get, because life has a funny way of doing that. No matter the best intentions that you may have, life will find a way to screw it up. Or at least throw in a number of obstacles, so you don't have to manually remember to get this show. You can hit subscribe, and then every time a new episode comes out, every other Monday, which you guys know is a bi-weekly show at this point in time, it will automatically be downloaded for you. So it's ready for your commute or your workout or whatever it happens to be, so that you can get the latest geek review from me, your friend Steve, through Sweet Story Bro, analyzing the writing to help me become a better writer. And you know what? There's a number of places that the show is uploaded to, but the easiest place that you could go to in order to get every link that you need, whether you're an iTunes guy or you want to listen to it through YouTube or anything like that, hit up sweetstorybro.com. And most importantly on there, you can find links to the Twitter, the Facebook, the YouTube, to get in contact with the show, to get in contact with me, to let me know what you think, what I could improve, what you love, if you agree or disagree with my points. I'm open to it all, and I am ready to hear what you have to say about every story that I review. Because if you can introduce a new or different angle to the story that could either explain something and blow it wide open for me if I get confused, which has happened from time to time, honestly. I think it happens to the best of us when we read any story. Sometimes there are elements that we either gloss over or get confused about. And I look to you guys for guidance to help me if you've read the story and you understand it in a way that maybe I missed. But everything you need for the show, all in one place, sweetstorybro.com, and that includes your Amazon links for all your purchasing needs. Amazon, specifically right now, amazon.co.uk. You hit up there, you do your shopping as you would normally do for anything on Amazon. Essentially, if you're looking to buy something on Amazon, don't go straight there. Go to sweetstorybro.com, hit my link at the top of the page to redirect you to amazon.co.uk. Why? Because you still get to buy the same product at the exact same price, but by doing it through my link, you send a little percentage back to the show that I feed back into the podcast. It helps me out, and it helps the show to grow, should I say. And you know what? That's your good deed for the day. Tiny little percentage, no different in cost to you, and you're doing a good deed. Hey, that's a win-win-win all around. I don't know why you would do anything else, honestly, unless you're a jerk. Unless you listen to this and decide, I'm purposely not going to do that. Yeah, you're a jerk. Jerk. But I know you're not, because you're a fan of this show, which I would like to think generally means you're a pretty decent person, honestly. But why this story? As always, what appealed about this book, this graphic novel in particular, for me to want to review it? And it's been a little while since I've done a graphic novel. I can't remember the last time. One of the ones that immediately pops in my head is the Last of Us American Dreams episode I did, and that was a while ago at this point, really. But what is the impetus behind the decision to review this graphic novel, The Rattler, by Jason McNamara? Honestly, it's pretty simple. The guys at Vault Comics, Dean and Connor, were super kind and gifted me a copy of this book to me on my birthday. I went over there, and on the night before my birthday, I recorded an episode of the Saturday Lunchtime Wrestling Podcast with Kieran, and spent the evening before with them. I brought cake and stuff like that, just so we could have a bit of a good time, shoot the shit in the comic book store and things like that. And, Dean just was nice enough to want to gift it to me, and Connor agreed, and that was cool. That was very nice of them. They didn't have to do that. I certainly didn't expect it, and that's what makes the gift even nicer, honestly. Another thing I really like about this graphic novel is the fact that it is a self-contained story. That's something I asked him when he brought it over to me. I was just like, hey, man, is this a part one or something like that? Or is this all self-contained within the one book? Because if I'm being perfectly honest, that's kind of how I would skew towards right now. That's what I would prefer, is the one self-contained story rather than buying into a whole world and everything like 20 volumes or something. Not because I don't want to go and continue reading it, not because I don't want to go back and buy it. That stuff doesn't bother me. It's just the story itself. I wanted to know, for once within comic books, if the intention of this graphic novel wasn't simply to continue selling more after the fact. And it turns out that is exactly what the case was. It is a self-contained story, all within this one graphic novel for my birthday. And that's great. And that's reason enough for me to want to review it, Geeky, graphic novel, fun stuff. Jason McNamara, I've heard of his name before, but I've not read any of his work that I can recall, that I can remember. So what better excuse than to crack open that spine and give it a read? So what did I think? Let's find out. Now, I want to start with the synopsis of the book, just so that you have an idea of the story we're talking about in case you haven't had a chance to read it yet. And as I say at the top, of course, or as the stinger says at the top, there will be spoilers in this podcast. So don't pretend that you don't know. Don't get shocked when I tell you secret things about the story that you maybe didn't want to know. But if you have read it, or if you don't care, enjoy this review. Enjoy this story. And, of course, if you do decide to pick it up after the fact, hey, I'll tell you what. If you buy it, take a photo of yourself and then tweet it at me, I will retweet it and follow you back. Little things like that matter. So I would really appreciate the help. And, of course, I want to know what you think of the story, too. And you can let me know at Sweet Story Bro. But here is the story. Here is the synopsis of The Rattler. So you know the details going forward. And this is taken from Amazon, and I quote, 10 years have passed since Stephen Thorn's fiancée vanished without a trace, and he has grown into a prominent, if bitter, victims' rights crusader. Despite the cold trail and lack of leads, he stubbornly refuses to give up the search. And then, he begins to hear her voice in the strangest of places. Pursued by his own organization and questioning his sanity, Stephen embarks on a grisly journey to save his long-lost love. As he unravels the truth of her disappearance, the body count rises and Stephen finds himself ensnared in a trap that has been set for him long ago. Now, as I preface and touched upon within the intro, one of my most favorite things about this book is actually the fact that it's a self-contained story. Too many things nowadays, although good, are all primed and ready to deliver you a story that simply is an introduction, something that leads on to something greater, something grander. But every story has an intro, every story has a beginning, so the beginning is always so important to get right. And, I mean, that's not necessarily true of most comic book, graphic novel, superhero fiction, because they're all stuck within a great Act 2. As Kev Smith puts it, which I love, by the way. You know, he's quoting somebody else, so I'm paraphrasing horribly, but we all know the origin of the superheroes is never going to end, right? So there's never going to be a third act finale. So everything's Act 2 for these heroes. But in so many stories, be it YA, you know, you look at stuff like The Hunger Games and things like that, or great fantasy like The Fellowship of the Ring, again, other books in that ilk, everything seems to be just a stepping stone to something more. It's rare to find a truly self-contained story, which is why I always find it so refreshing when I do, honestly. And that's probably one of my favorite things about this story, is the fact that you just read it for what it is, knowing that everything that the author wanted to say should, in theory, be said within its pages. Jason McNamara actually has this to say on that theory, you know, about how he wanted to pace the story and why it is self-contained. And this is taken from an interview done with adventuresinpoortaste.com, and I quote, "Conventional wisdom dictates that the miniseries, followed by a collection, is a better business model. But for a book like The Rattler, it's not the reading experience we wanted people to have. Establishing tone and suspense is so hard in a horror comic book, breaking that into fourths was never going to be as effective. Image agreed, and we were able to produce the book the way we want it to be read," end quote. And that's nice because, I mean, firstly, it shows that it was always meant to be this way. There was no sort of publisher leaning on them or anything like that to force it up into parts. And Image, the comic book publisher, of course, were more than happy to support this artistic vision. And that's so important in this day and age, to find people that believe in what you're trying to do, and not only believe it, but also assist you in getting it done. And Image did that. They didn't look at this story that Jason handed in and go, can you split this? We want to try and run it as long as possible. And like he says in that quote, a mini-series that would have been, 6 to 8 episodes or issues, before releasing in a graphic novel, hardcover, then softcover. And then, you know, again, from a business model standpoint, that does make all the sense in the world, but that's not how they wanted to tell this story. And having read it, honestly, that would have killed the pacing of the story, because everything's so self-contained, the pacing works incredibly well. I happened to read this in just the one sitting, and I agree with what he's saying here. To rip it apart and split it over the course of months, you know, one issue a month for 8 months, 6 to 8 months, would have killed it. It would have had its fans, and people would have collected it. And, of course, when you reread it, it would have been a better reading experience. But to read it as singles, it wouldn't have worked. So props to Jason and his artist for sticking to their guns and their core beliefs in wanting to get the book out the way they wanted it done. I mean, on that point, you know, it's nicely paced. The book really does chug along at an exceptionally fast rate. For the story that it is. It's relatively short for this self-contained story format, and there's a surprising lack of dialogue in between its pages. Most of its panels are very dramatic, very well drawn, help tell the story on a visual basis, but because of that, it's really quick to get through, you know? But that doesn't stop the pacing of the actual revelations, of the twists, of the, you know, all these arcs, all these twists and winds the story unveils itself. It doesn't stop that from being a big positive to the book. And again, taken from the same interview with Adventures in Poor Taste, Jason has this to say, quote, I had a complete script locked and ready to go when Greg came onto the project. But once his pages started coming in, I threw away 50% of the story and just started writing for him. It was an intensely collaborative process. Greg is very invested in creating a complete story world, and we reworked a lot of ideas together. I mean, after the book was illustrated, I lettered the pages and changed it even more in the process. By the time Greg got to read The Rattler, he didn't even know how it ended. End quote. And I think that's important because it shows that no matter how well you think you know your story, when it comes to a collaborative process like comic book writing, man, you could throw everything out of the window like that. I'm going to snap my fingers. Okay, I'm just going to get my finger in front of my and like that. Everything can change because people can, your collaborators, your artists, your letterers might throw something in the way that you never even thought of, or look at an obstacle that you've written for your characters and go, well, this doesn't make sense. Why don't they just try that? And again, it's these concepts where you're just like, holy shit, I never even fucking thought about that, because you're too close to the story to be able to take that objective step back. But it's so weird that he ended up writing, really taking on a lot of this on board, throwing away a lot of the story, and helping his artist to help him craft the rest of it before they even get to the end. And the fact that they didn't even know how it was going to end initially, firstly, I find that kind of dubious given how it does end. It really, really seems to be the only natural conclusion for the story that they're telling for this character, Stephen Thorn. Another really, really good thing about this story that I really enjoyed, and interestingly, I mean, it really does tie in to the first 2 points that I've made here, the self-contained story and the fact that it's nicely paced, is there's this ever-growing sense of dread with a conflicted central character. And this is very important because, man, their main character does some dubious shit. He does some weird things on his quest to find his fiancée, who he believes is communicating with him through the bodies of the dead, which is an eerie and interesting idea. The way it first starts is somebody tries to kill him in his home, and during the fight, he comes out on top, the other guy accidentally dies, and through that now cadaver, he hears Catherine's voice speaking to him from beyond the grave, urging him to find her, trying to help him. And it's an interesting one because we never really know whether that's real or not. We never really know whether she is actually communicating with him or if it's all in his head. And I really don't know where I fall on that, honestly, because there's information that's given to him that he simply wouldn't have without her help. He wouldn't have been able to find where she was hidden without the information that she gave him. Stephen Thorn, incidentally, after losing her all those years ago, was able to create a mass database in order to try and make sure this never happens again. And utilizing that database, he then, threads through, eliminates variables until he finds people that he thinks, or places he thinks Catherine could be. It's an interesting process of elimination using a system that her disappearance helped him put in place and make him a celebrity, incidentally. He's not faultless. He's not blameless. He doesn't necessarily come across as an entirely good person, especially as the rest of the book goes by. His character becomes more and more corrupted by this idea of the ends justify the means in order to get what he wants, which is answers and, of course, his fiancée. Jason says this, and this is taken from an interview with multiversitycomics.com, quote, "Well, for me, flawed characters are just more interesting to explore. Stephen is not a pleasant person. He's an emotionally unavailable, self-absorbed guy who built an empire exploiting his fiancée's disappearance. And, like most awful people, he believes he has an excuse to behave the way he does. But when Stephen starts to receive messages from Catherine with clues to where she might be, that rationale falls apart. The closer he gets to finding Catherine, the more he's forced to confront what kind of person he really is." End quote. I mean, he elaborates upon that in a slightly different way with this quote taken from uprocks.com. "My take is that Stephen is an emotionally empty person who uses Catherine's disappearance to justify his behavior. As he gets closer to finding Catherine, he's also trying to outrun his own anxiety because he knows finding Catherine won't fix him. He's been living in this myth he created for himself, but by the end, that facade is completely crumbled and Stephen is exposed for what he truly is." end quote, which is ultimately a bit of a narcissist, a bit of a sociopath, willing to step on people and use people and lie and manipulate to get what he wants. And what he wants happens to be what you could consider a noble goal, yeah, but the wake of destruction that he leaves in his path, is it really all worth it? And that's what makes his character interesting. That's what makes him compelling in the first instance. And thankfully, it's an element to his character that is smartly developed, clear and concise in its execution throughout the entire story. You see him as he cracks and devolves and falls apart. You really do go on that journey with him to a point where he doesn't recognize himself anymore if you were to ask him to describe the kind of person he is. He's just so distant from his center, from his core, from who he was. He's completely driven. Ambitious doesn't even do it justice. He's obsessed, man. So he's a yeah, put it short, he's an interesting character, the Stephen Thorn. And the use of this complex character, because the other characters, honestly, are all kind of a little bit paintbrushed. They're all a bit one-dimensional, two-dimensional at the very, very, very best. And it's good that Stephen has so much depth, because the story itself is incredibly simple in concept, and I actually say that as a positive. Still going through the positives right now, but it's an incredibly simple concept for this story, and it ties into the fact, and this is an amazing fact, that it's all loosely based on a real story, a true fucking story. This idea of somebody disappearing, all based in truth. But bear with me, because that's not necessarily the whole truth here, right? I've got to say, there's going to be extra points here for Jason for how he decided to present this fact, because he didn't bury the lead. He didn't put it front and center of the book. He didn't put it on the cover saying based on a true concept or a true idea or real story, because only part of it is true, not all of it. Obviously, he's a successful author, but he's not got his own crime network that he's able to scour through and things like that. Jason actually leaves a really interesting author's note at the end of the book, at the end of the graphic novel, that extrapolates upon the idea of what happened to him and his friend many, many summers ago, many, many, many years ago. I think it was 2001, if I remember correctly. And it really adds to the emotional heft of the story that preceded it. And I cannot stress enough that you come to the end of the story, as fast-paced as it was, fast-paced, well-paced, short, and then you read this amazing author's note that is like 2 pages long that suddenly recontextualizes everything you just fucking read. It's very clever that he put it at the end and not fucking buried it at the start. And he says this, I've got a quote here, taken again from the interview with uprocks.com with Jason, and allow him to explain the story in his own words rather than fucking waffling and paraphrasing and not doing it justice, honestly. That's the honest truth of it. Anything I could try and say in regards to what happened to him would simply pale in comparison to the dude's own words, which are here right now for you. So allow me to shut the fuck up and for just a couple moments speak for Jason using his own words, quoting him directly from uprocks.com. And I quote, "The story was inspired by a road trip I took with a friend years ago. We ran out of gas in a rural area of California, and a passing motorist offered to tow a car to a gas station. Instead, he attempted to drive away with my friend and leave me behind. Luckily, she was able to get away, and he drove off empty-handed. Strangely enough, at the time, it wasn't that traumatic, but over the years, I've dwelled on it more. I would wonder, what if she hadn't gotten away? What would that have done to me? Then I'd feel guilty that I was focusing on myself. And then I realized what was the story. How a self-aggrandizing writer would commodify the tragedy as a brand. So it's a personal story in that I'm writing about all the narcissistic traits I dislike in myself." End quote. And that's a brave thing to say, to really put yourself front and center, to say, on that fateful night, had that dude got away because he was using rope, not steel, and the rope broke. And terrifyingly enough, apparently the guy just looked at them after they got out and ran away, was just watching them before casually getting back in his car and leaving again. And, I mean, you would be right in thinking, as a first gut reaction, what the fuck is this guy's problem? Who would do that? What human being would do that? But human beings can be a little bit fucked up, unfortunately, a little bit twisted, and who knows what would have happened. But it's brave of him to put it front and center, the fact that some of his thoughts following that incident were reflected on him. What would have happened to him? How would he have reacted? How would this have affected his life and not his friends? Although, of course, he would have cared. Don't be silly. Of course he would have cared. He would have given a shit. But humans can and are inherently selfish. They do try to turn it around on themselves because their very selves are the people they have to deal with on a daily basis. So how would he be able to look at himself in the mirror day in, day out, having attempted to trust this motherfucker that then tried to take his friend? It's not like he even tried to get all testosterone-y and try to fight him after the fact. They just scrambled out and ran away because, hey man, a dude who has a rope to tie two cars together and then attempt to steal your friend who happened to be a girl, you don't know what that guy's packing. Could be a gun, could be a knife. It is America out in the middle of nowhere. But this author's note is so good, and you should definitely, if you decide to read the book, don't skim over it. I know some people don't take interest in that stuff. They just want the core story. But believe me, this is part of the story. And it's funny because he puts it at the end, and yet that's the impetus of the entire narrative. Without that, he doesn't have the beginning of his story. Without that, he doesn't have a story at all, and the Rattler wouldn't be around. So, if you do pick up this book, and you can do it through sweetstorybro.com and clicking on the Amazon link at the top, you know that, be sure to read it, because I promise you, it completely recontextualizes how you just take in that story, and honestly, how you might look at people if they offer you help going forward in the future, if you happen to be along a long, dusty trail, out of gas, with a friend, and a strange man in a pickup truck decides to stop over to help you all out. Yeah, help you straight into his fucking sex dungeon. Don't trust that motherfucker, dude. Although, honestly, I live over here in England, have done for a while. I know that might be confusing due to the accent. So if I ever encountered this sort of stuff, they wouldn't be sounding like, "Oh, hi there. Let me help y'all, buddy. No problem. Let me just attach my rope to your truck and I'll drag y'all to safety. You look mighty fine, bird of mouth there. Yeah, I reckon." Nope, it won't sound like that. They'll sound more like orcs in Lord of the Rings. I tend to live in an area, unfortunately, where I have to work with clientele that sound a lot like that. You imagine what the orcs sound like? Hey, some of the goblins too. That's what I got to deal with on a daily basis. Unfortunately, I'm not yet at that point in my life. I'd like to be where my life revolves around right, fight, talk. But, I mean, hey, ultimately the message remains the same, and it is this. Don't trust that motherfucker. Alarm bells got to be ringing in you at that point. But hey, what do I know? I got conned by a dude called John in Texas. Still not over that. Fuck you, John. You're fucking dick. I hate you. I hate you. But talking about cons is a very, very sloppy or incredibly smooth segue, depending how you fall on this. It's time to talk about the things that I wasn't so hot on with this story. Firstly, and I did kind of mention this earlier, I put it into both columns because I feel very divided about this. On the one hand, it is a self-contained story that is incredibly nicely paced. But on the other, and I mentioned this earlier, it is just way, way too short. The pacing of the whole thing is great. They use panels to wonderful effect to tell a very visual story. But because there's so little dialogue over so many pages, you get through it very quickly. Your eyes skim the pages, they take in the detail. It really does come across more like a sort of printed storyboard than anything else, which people argue graphic novels can be anyway. But, there are so many stories out there that prove what the comic book medium can be. And I know my boys of Vault Comics would agree with that, But I really did feel that this story was too short. It's rare to say that. Honestly, a lot of times, and I'm sure I've critiqued a lot of stuff where I say it's too long, too long-winded, loses its way, it gets confused in itself because of the pacing. But for once, I wish that this would have been longer. This is as much a negative as a positive. I wish it was longer because I was enjoying the story. And goddamn, it's just too short because it's so quick to get through. I did this in one sitting. I probably got through it in an hour and change, maybe slightly more, because it's so quick to flip through. that doesn't necessarily impact the story, though, in the way of saying, oh, it's bad because of it, but it does feel just a little bit too quick, if I'm being perfectly honest. But, they stuck to their guns. And, listening to Jason talk, again, from his interview with adventuresinpoortaste.com, he has this to say, quote, "We didn't pitch it to any publishers beforehand. I didn't think that was a good use of our time or energies. We had really strong ideas on how to successfully present the material to an audience, and we got to do it in our own way, which worked out great. Instead of telling a publisher what we'd like to do, we were able to show them what we did," end quote. The reason I attribute this quote to my point here about the fact it's too short is it's obviously the story that he wanted to tell. That's how he wanted to do it. And they had a fully formed product to show off before they even started asking, "You interested?" The project was done. This whole thing was a Kickstarter project, incidentally, in case you didn't know. I certainly didn't know this when I first started reading it. It was a Kickstarter project that met its funding, and they were very clever with it because they got everything done and in order beforehand. So they were able to meet all of their deadlines, get it out on time, and everybody who dedicated money to the project got something out of it, as opposed to so many people that put money towards a project just to have delays to the project, pushbacks, if not outright cancellations, people taking money, people losing money, whatever it happens to be. Jason McNamara and his colleague, his artist Greg, I forget his surname right now, forgive me, did a great job with this by having a finished product ready and lined up before even getting it online. That's pretty sound marketing sense. It has nothing to do with the fucking story, but it shows how much belief they had in the book and how they wanted to get it right. The fine minutia of why they wanted to get the story so right. And, not splitting it up, not bending to that sort of publisher pressure and keeping it self-contained, that really does come across. I really think, though, personally, that it would have benefited from being extended, if anything. He was worried about it being cut up, about it being presented in a format that wasn't the way it should be, in the same way where The Watchmen works really well as a collected graphic novel, so does The Rattler. It wouldn't have worked as a miniseries, which we touched on earlier. That's not what I'm saying. But I definitely think it's interesting. As a writer, why did he choose to make it the length that it was? Obviously, he didn't have it in his head. I'm going to make, I'm going to make it 104 pages flat, and I'm going to meet that 104-page mark, and that's it. No more, no less, 104. Why that number? Obviously, that's not how they went into the project. That would be a really odd parameter to have in a writing project for a comic book, but the pacing of the story, apparently that's how he wanted it. But I really think there was more here. I wish that he spent more time building the other characters and fleshing them out. Stephen got all the attention, which on one hand makes sense. He is the main character, but you do have a number of other characters, secondary characters, and supporting cast that would have done, I would have cared a lot more about some of their deaths had I given a shit about them at all. Look at the characters of Chantel and Kai Zhu, for example, the people that work for Thorn Industries, his company, who are on his tail trying to find him, trying to help him before he hurts other people, as they uncover the mystery of why he's becoming so possessed and how they're trying to find him with that. Because, they're chasing him too. It's a big sort of race to the finish line with all these characters. And this is before we consider Chantal's twist near the end, which is very, very Stephen King-esque. But Kai Zhu is killed off near the end of the book through a dubious death, having a car drop on him at a farmhouse. And the only things that define his character are the fact that he is an Asian rockabilly in a band that apparently sound terrible, and he's got a crush on this Chantel woman. And that's it. That's all we got to go on. I mean, he comes across as nice enough, I suppose, in a sort of aloof sort of way, but that's not enough for us to care. That's not enough to really be invested in his character. The only characters that we really get to know truly are Stephen. And that's it. I mean, even Catherine, to a lesser degree, is somewhat fleshed out, no pun intended, but I think really she just exists as a victim. Her development, her character sort of exploration is all from the side of a victim because she's scared, she doesn't know what's going on. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm not saying this in a social justice warrior manner of, oh, every character, male or female, but in this case happens to be female, should be fleshed out. I hate the fact that she just comes across as a female victim. Well, in this case, she is a female victim, so that's how she should come across, and that's what Jason did with her character. Makes sense. But I don't think it's really – you can't overlook Kaizu's involvement here and how he treats some of these secondary characters. There's even a male and a female character that Stephen goes to interrogate in the first instance to try and eliminate them from his variable list. And this is the weirdest thing, because honestly, I can't think of any real impact that they had on the story. If you kind of lift them out, it doesn't matter, it doesn't really impact on them. Because the woman was a registered sex offender because she started courting her husband, the black guy or boyfriend, when he was still underage. And now that he is over said age limit, they are together now. But that doesn't stop her from being a pedophile or being put onto the sex registers offenders list. But I don't really, I mean, I can't recall how that really impacts the story. Maybe I need to read it again. I could do it in a couple hours, as I said, because it is too short. That's what we're talking about. But I didn't really see anything there. You know, I don't know how it really impacted or helped the story or furthered it or catapulted it. It was just there. They provided a car. He got a car out of it, but that was it, really. Now, apart from being too short, despite being well-paced, another big issue that I had with the story is the fact that I actually found it way too predictable, honestly. It's got a fun twist. I think I said that earlier. It does have a fun twist, and the revelation is incredibly well presented. The art is great, all part of the storytelling process as well, of course. But the story itself, the way it presents it, the twists and turns we go on, is it real, is it fake, what is happening here, how will this end? Well, it's immediately obvious how it's going to end. It's clear to anybody that's really sort of experienced these sort of stories before or has, and I know I might be in the relative minority here, but tries to understand the story on a deeper level. I have to, given what I want to do, you know? But yeah, I mean, it's a fun twist. I'm not going to take away from it. It's a fun twist, but it's mired with constant telegraphing. And it also leans on an almost direct Stephen King lift from Misery, which really bothers me. I mean, the twist itself is the fact that Chantel, the woman that works for him as his secretary, PA, personal assistant, is in fact completely insane. She loves Stephen Thorn, and it was her mother, Esther, that actually kidnapped Catherine all those years ago. And they're playing this sort of Misery angle to bring Stephen into their home, to bring him into their life, because they're obsessed with him as a plaything. They love him. Or that is to say, she, Chantel, not her real name, of course, loves him. And this entire thing, it was a ruse, the job, the fact that she did, I would guess, did well in order to get the job in the first instance. I mean, she says, I think she explains it in the book, saying that she went to a book meeting, a meet and greet with a signing, chose the name Chantel because it was close enough to Catherine without being too obvious, and played all these psychological tricks on him to allow him to trust her and then subsequently hire her, put her in a position of trust and power that was later then abused, and obviously completely tipped on his head by this revelation that she was playing him the entire time because she wanted a little bit of the STD. This is Stephen. Yeah, she wanted a little bit of Stephen Thorn's D, the STD. And it's all just sick mind games. That's all it is, all helped by the mother. So the two of them are in on it together, twisted as a family, you know? Having kidnapped numerous other peoples in the exact same situation and scenarios as they did Catherine, and kidnapping them. But the problem with this is the fact that it is Stephen King. I mean, the name Stephen Thorn, spelled with a PH, like how mine is, not with the Americanized V, which is rich given how I sound, I know. But Stephen King, Stephen Thorn. Thorn apparently was one of the characters, or a pseudonym that Stephen King wrote under, apparently, I think, given the research I gave. So these guys are obviously big fans, and I'm all for referential meta-ness. I love that. So the name, things like that doesn't bother me. It's lifting that element that is so clearly from Misery, you know, loving the author to a point where you're obsessive and don't want to let him get away, you know. It's all a game to them, to some degree, an obsessive game of simple possession. And McNamara, Jason, says this, and this is taken from an interview with comicfrontline.blogspot.co.uk, and I quote, Like many of King's works, the Rattler features a writer as the protagonist. Our Stephen chose the synonym Thorn for himself, and later in the book, in a Misery-like scene, we learn his birth name was Bachman. I thought it was a nice little nod to Misery, which was supposed to be released as a Bachman book before King was outed as the author. I also like the idea that in the Rattler world, Stephen King exists and coincidentally took the name of a budding writer, forcing Stephen Bachman to flee the connection by creating a pseudonym of his own. End quote. Again, meta, that's all done for him. If the reader knows it or gets it, that's great. I understand what he's talking about after having read it, despite obviously seeing the Misery reference. I didn't look at the name Stephen Thorn and immediately piece together Stephen King, but I'm all for meta reveille. I'm all for meta communication. I'm all for meta references, I love that stuff because it really does just layer a story with what the author loves. And if it's something that the readers also happen to love, that Venn diagram of shared interest, all the better. But it's never, ever done in a way, and I try to do this with my writing as well, because I consider a hallmark of good writing, to be able to sprinkle your references in, and people get it, that's great. But for those that don't, it doesn't mire the story. It doesn't take away from it, not one bit, man. But it doesn't change the fact that the ending of this entire thing is incredibly predictable. He finds himself on the farm at the end after having been kidnapped again in the exact same sort of situation by Esther, who claims to have helped him, and then he wakes up all bandaged and stuff, very, very misery, and he eventually stumbles across where Catherine is being held, which is like in a shipping container underground, and there's a trapdoor and stuff, and there are all these other bodies in there of the people that went missing before that were touched on earlier in the story, which is a nice callback, hung up, just mummified corpses. And in a heart-wrenching moment, he tries to propose to her. They hug. Everything is good. He puts the ring that he's kept in his pocket, kept on his person for 10 years, proposes to her. She says yes. And when the cops come to get him, he makes a joke out of it, saying, "Silly me, after all these years, I got her ring size wrong. The ring keeps slipping off. It keeps falling off." And then we get the horrible reveal, of course, that he is holding Catherine's mummified corpse. And it is a great ending, and it is presented very well. A man losing everything, completely cracked, unable to accept the truth of the situation, but it's a predictable ending. You're good. You know where it's heading. So that's why it was really interesting to me that the quote from earlier where Jason was saying that they didn't know where the story was going themselves, because there only ever seems to be the one ending that they're hurtling towards. And it is predictable. Every step of this journey along the way, you're probably going to be able to see. And again, it's because they telegraph it so much. They really do highlight their own twists and turns before the twists and turns arrive. It's like those jerks. I think I said that one time before. It's like those jerks in the cinema that 2 seconds before somebody gets shot and killed in the movie go, they're going to die. Then it happens, and then they're super fucking stoked with themselves. Those guys are such dicks. I hate those guys. But it's the same thing of self-telegraphing. Doesn't mire the story, but it does just take the wind out of the sails just a little bit. Now, the biggest issue I had with this story, bar none, and this really ties into a lot of the leads that Chantel and Kaizu are investigating along the way, is the fact that a lot of the story is predicated on the audience not asking questions, simply taking the story in as a story and enjoying it for what it is. And there's no bad thing with that, right? Sometimes that's exactly what you need. Sometimes I still choose to watch a movie or read a book or whatever it happens to be without the intent of doing it for the podcast, because I just want to enjoy it. I don't want to dissect it. And I think this is one of those stories that actually would have benefited from that, because looking at it with that sort of critical eye for the show, I do think that there's way too many opportunities that are missed to be explained. There are way too many things that come up where characters just decide to go somewhere without really showing the work. You know, when you did like a math equation or you're trying to do it and somebody goes, oh, show the work. How do you get here? And you have to show it. For this, there's none of that. I felt. Again, all of this is just my opinion, both the pros, the cons, and the geeky elements of it. All my opinion, of course. But So many, in my notes, I wrote down, like, how did they get this lead? Why are they in the middle of nowhere? Why would their journey lead them here to this specific place? There are so many times where they're just guided by who knows what, making decisions based on unknown information to us. And it felt like it was cut down short. And this ties back to my initial issue where I had a problem with the length of it. I think it's too short. And a little bit more time to just help and explain. It's not padding. It's not empty padding, because it would have been fucking context. And that's so important here for us to understand, why are they doing this? Why are they in this specific place? The biggest one for me was the farm at the end. Obviously, we know Chantal turns heel. She's always been bad. But Kaizu doesn't know that. Kaizu doesn't know he's being played. So why the fuck is she at this farm? And why hasn't Kaizu said anything? You would have thought he would have questioned it at some point to be like, hey, why are we heading here? None of the evidence, I don't believe, has said we should come here. Nothing really about a farm at all. So what are we doing here? Why have we traveled X amount of miles to this point to here? We're in the middle of nowhere, Chantal. What's going on? None of that. And it's really, really, really bothersome when a smart writer with a entertaining story asks you to completely suspend your sense of disbelief to the point where you're not asking simple questions of why decisions are being made by these characters. You just expect to be buffeted along by the course of the river till you get to the end of the story. And for people that want a little bit more from their writing, that's not enough, and that's not good enough. That really stuck in my craw. That was the biggest problem I have with this graphic novel. And that's not to say that it was bad writing. That's not to say that it's a bad story or it's undercooked because of it. But it is enough to say that, to say it's insulting is too much. It needed it. It needed it. Just a little bit more. And this ties in, like I said, I can't get away from this. It's too short. 10 more pages, 20 more pages, just a little bit more exposition. Doesn't need to be heavy-handed. Doesn't need to be fucking messy or obvious or anything like that. It could have been done very subtly. But a little bit more explanation, a little bit more exposition would have done wonders for this book as a whole, honestly. But, hey, as I've frequently said, it's an entertaining story in the short time that you're with it, but is it a good story? Entertaining doesn't always necessarily mean good. Like, hey, man, I was entertained by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Out of the Shadows, right? I'm a huge fucking turtle fan, a shellhead, if you will. I love the Ninja Turtles. I've always loved the Ninja Turtles in every iteration they've done, although I've not ever watched The Next Mutation. Not yet. I may do. And I was entertained by that movie, but I also left it going, that was a dumb movie. That was stupid. A lot of it was dumb. The story, not really much there. But was I entertained? Yeah. I bet Jason McNamara never thought that the Rattler would be ever compared within the same sort of context as TMNT 2 Out of the Shadows. And I don't mean that. I certainly don't mean to knock either in any way like that. But I just wanted to stress that you can be entertained by something that isn't necessarily recognized as good. So with that, do I actually think it is good? More importantly, you guys know the scoring system. Is it officially too sweet or officially just not sweet enough? And I'm always going to be honest here. I'm not paid for these podcasts. I do it for the love of story. I love podcasting. I love the Potter family. I love doing this for you guys. And I'm loving that I'm hearing more back from you. So all I've ever wanted with this show was this dialogue where I share my thoughts about this, the good, the bad, and I hear what you have to say about it too. And we can start talking about it, primarily on Twitter. I don't use Facebook anymore. So please check it out on Twitter @SweetStoryBro. This story, it's well-paced throughout. It's admittedly short story. The writing is tight, despite a surprising limit in dialogue in places. A lot of this story is told through panels, which fits fine for the medium that it is, of course. The Rattler broaches an interesting subject, right? It broaches an interesting subject born out of one man's genuine life what-if scenario. An experience that is both as twisted and terrifying as it can get, because who knows how you would react in this sort of similar situation? Who knows how I would react? Because it's so crazy to think of, you would never think it would be something that could ever fucking happen. And yet it did to this dude back in the day. That's nuts. The main character, Stephen, is conflicted, burdened with agency and obsession, leading him to doing things that make him difficult to categorize as a true, like, quote, white hat good guy. And it's this willingness and self-justification that makes him all the more compelling as a protagonist. In fact, Jason McNamara has a great take on one of the main themes of his story. And this is taken from adventuresinpoortaste.com. Quote, "Well, this might sound strange, but the book is really about relationships. Almost every character in the book has a partner, and their relationships are tested or destroyed by Stephen's loneliness. But the Rattler won't be shelved in the relationship section of your local bookstore anytime soon, so I've been calling it a horror thriller. That it's also a love story with very dark humor is an added bonus." End quote. Obvious final twists, revelations, and undercooked secondary characters can't be overlooked when talking about this story, as I've already stressed prior. But it doesn't mire, accumulatively, they don't mire what is otherwise a quick, fun, and engaging read. One that is heightened tenfold by the revelation that it's loosely based on McNamara's real experience. Not revealing this fact until after the story, like I said, is a masterstroke, forcing you to reflect on what you've just read and recontextualizing it as well. It's smart. I mean, you'll be done with this story in no time at all, with a lot of dramatic panels drawn in a wonderfully semi-cartoony style, which does nothing to take away from the gravity of the story that it's trying to tell, as well as the minimal dialogue gelling with the well-paced story that hurdles you ever forward onward to the end. I mean, ultimately, this story is not without its problems, though I do consider them to be quite minor, right? It still has the problems, but still, undeniably, to me, The Rattler by Jason McNamara and Greg Hinkle is officially too sweet. And that's going to do it for another episode of Sweet Story, Bro. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to let me know what you think about The Rattler by Jason McNamara and Greg Hinkle on Twitter at Sweet Story, Bro. You can do it on YouTube. If you're listening to this on YouTube, use the comment section below. I see this stuff. I comment back to you. And hey, you know what? Let's go old school. If you want to email me, you can do it at sweetstorybro@icloud.com, wherever you want. And if you want to check out the story yourself, The Rattler, why not purchase it via the Amazon links on sweetstorybro.com? I said it at the top, I'll say it again. It's no more expensive for you, and it kicks back a percentage to help the show so I can make more content, because my dream would be able to make a career out of my writing and my podcasting, which would help me with my fighting, the jiu-jitsu that I love to do so much. A perfect day would be writing, going to jiu-jitsu class, come back doing a podcast, some more writing, whatever it happens to be. And just that's for me, that's the perfect life. And you know what? It couldn't be simpler. You can help that by doing some Amazon shopping on my sweetstorybro.com website. Real sincere right now. I cannot tell you how much that would mean to me for one of you to take the time out to make a purchase to help me, And you can also, if you wanted to, if you really enjoy it and you want to help as well, help the podcast, help the show, and you enjoyed this episode, this review, you can leave a tip, a couple of dollars here or there, however much you want to leave. You could leave as much as a cup of coffee, a large, or as little as the cost of cupcake, or whatever it happens to be. Everything helps the show. I would love to just keep making more and more and more content for you. I would love that. I would love my days to be filled with writing so you can enjoy my books, and podcasting so you can enjoy more shows and my thoughts on these different stories. And I really try to handle these, and I really try to tackle every story even-handedly, good and bad, right? I don't flip-flop it one way or the other. Because, hey, maybe one day these other writers are going to be my peers, and they might listen to this. And if I, one day have a conversation with Jason, he's like, hey, motherfucker, I listened to your goddamn Sweet Story, bro. Sweet Story, fist to your face. I look at it as evenly as I can, and I'm never denigrating it from a standpoint of like, this sucks, and here's no context as why this fucking sucks. I put a lot of hard work into these shows. Not only do I take joy out of recording them for you, but the research takes time. The server costs money, So if you could do your Amazon shopping on sweetstorybro.com or leave a tip at paypal.me/sweetstorybro, man, that's life-changing stuff. And it may sound crazy, but a couple of dollars to pop into that account would have me over the moon. And if enough people did it, enough people listened to the show and wanted to help, Who knows where that could lead? And you could do that at paypal.me/sweetstorybro. Thank you. Lastly, of course, be sure to share the show with your story-loving friends and review friends. These kinds of things are really big on YouTube. It's a perfect platform for podcasts. And podcasts, hey, I honestly think they're just as good, if not better, than YouTube. I do this as a podcast. I choose not to do it as a YouTube show because I love the podcast format. I love the podcast medium. I'm a big podcast fan, as is everybody else I know at my family. #Potter family. Those guys are awesome. If you're looking for a show, check it out. I guarantee you're going to find some. There's so many movie ones to choose from, so many TV show ones to choose from. It is a great community. Just like-minded people. Check it out. You'll find something, man. Share the love of Sweet Story Bro. Spread the conversation with your friends. Who knows? They may love the show just as much as you do. But if they don't know about it, it's your job to let them know and help them spread the word too. So until next time, man, be sure to keep your eyes on Twitter for the Monday Mention so you know what the next story is going to be. So you can either read it, watch it, catch up on it, play it, so there's no spoilers. And be sure, please, this is so important, take the time to treat yourself, and I implore you to go enjoy some stories. I'm out. If you enjoyed the sound of Jason McNamara's The Rattler, why not check out one of the source stories that kind of helped inspire it in some degree? I mentioned it during the review itself, and the comparisons are there for a reason. Check out Stephen King's Misery. It's narrated by Lindsay Krause, and you can get it for free today through audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. By visiting audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro, you get yourself a free audiobook of your choice. I'm recommending Stephen King's Misery, but it can be whatever you want it to be. But most importantly, you also get a 30-day free trial to see if you like the service that they're offering. No hidden fees, no extra costs, nothing like that. Just a free audiobook of your choice and a 30-day subscription to the service at audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. Get yourself something free today.